empowering both women and men everywhere to view our intricate hormonal bodies as the miracles they are, reducing the stigma around menstruation and the menstrual cycle and all that it comes with, and driving us toward a more harmonious tomorrow. I couldn't be more pleased to welcome Alisa Vitti to the Majic Hour.
Yay!
Hi, here.
So glad to have you here. I'm a huge fan. We talked all about it before you got on. You have a really interesting story of how you came to the work you're doing now. So could you maybe explore that journey with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think long and short of it is that I had this experience of hormonal chaos at a young age and had it totally, interrupt everything about my life, not just my health, but also my life. And so there was this early on connection in my mind between my hormones and what I could do with my time and my life. And for those of you who are listening who have hormonal imbalances or endometriosis or PCOS or perimenopause or whatever you're dealing with, infertility, it's not just a factor of the time that you put into trying to deal with your symptoms or get well. It's also the decrease in energy and life force vitality that you have because your system is not functioning optimally. And so without realizing it, I guess I embarked on a journey at a young age of female-specific biohacking, which I'm pretty passionate about, sharing with women because we've all been duped to do into biohacking as if we're tiny men, and it's making us so sick and symptomatic. But yes, I mean, I struggled with a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, although I was not diagnosed for 7 years, 7 long, highly symptomatic years, and that looked like only 5 menstrual cycles from the age of 12 to 22, 2 of which were chemically induced with synthetic progesterone. And it looked like massive weight gain. On my 5'6" frame, I was tipping the scales at 210. And it looked like a lot of cystic acne. I mean, so much cystic acne on my face, chest, and back that I would have to take so much time every day to just cover that up to feel like I could walk outside and not feel conspicuous and ashamed of how I looked. And then it also manifested as insomnia and, depression with a little bit of anxiety as well. So it was a very overwhelming disorder. And I felt very isolated and alone because it didn't seem like anybody else that I knew was suffering with that. Even though the statistics are 1 in 10 women have PCOS, 1 in 10 have endometriosis, 1 in 10 have fibroids. I mean, the vast majority of women, when you add the aggregate of all of these 1 in 10s, it turns out about half of all women are struggling with hormonal imbalances. But my doctors had no idea what was wrong with me, and they kept dismissing my concerns about how I was feeling and saying it was all in my head and that I was just, having difficult teenage years and I should just go on the pill and kind of be quiet. And that's also a common experience for so many women, right? Where you are told to ignore your pain, or let's look at Lena Dunham, right? She is I would say, a modern martyr of, the failings of our healthcare system for women, right? That should have been caught. Her ego should have been caught so much earlier, and so much support been given to her so that she did not have to end up having to have a hysterectomy at such a young age, right? That should not be the quote unquote final solution and best option. I mean, just think about it this way too. If we compare the lack of research and solutions for women with reproductive health issues compared to men's, physiology, right? And this area of their health. If men had an erection dysfunction or prostate dysfunction or something that was, bothering their testicular performance, they would not just say, well, there's nothing we can do, we should just remove them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the last thing they would literally opt for.
Yeah.
It would not even be a thought. It would just not even be a thought. Instead, you have quite the opposite. I mean, just think about, I think it was in the 90s. Remember when Bob Dole would get on TV and talk about his ED? Do you remember that?
No.
It was groundbreaking.
But that's amazing.
PSA, like little commercial public service announcements. Bob Dole, who was once a presidential candidate, would get on TV and talk about his erectile dysfunction and how there's medication that, and you shouldn't be ashamed and you should talk to your doctor. This is a non-life-threatening situation. And compared to what I was facing in my teens and 20s with all of these systemic issues, from metabolic to mental health to physical appearance to reproductive health, so many systems, right? Where's the research? Where's the funding? Instead, they put, I don't even know how much money, but I'm certain it was into the multiple millions, if not $1 billion of research went into fund the development of medications like Viagra, right? In fact, nitric oxide in 1992 was deemed the molecule of the year, just to show how nerdy I am. Oh my God. And that is the basis of Viagra. Where is the equivalent for women? And we see that when there isn't an equivalent, what is happening to us? It's my experience of that decade of my young life, my youth, where it should be all, lovely, pubescent, normal stuff. It was co-opted by something that could have been avoided with information and support. And you can't get that time back. And for anybody who's struggling with chronic health issues or hormonal issues, it steals your time. Yeah. And your time is your precious gift. So I vowed pretty early on that if I could figure out how to get well, that I would build a platform, a place for women to come and get that kind of information, education, support, products, programs, tools to make this easy. Because the fact that we don't have that in our modern recorded history, a place for women to go and just get that hormonal support that they need, is very telling. And I don't think it's acceptable at this point. It's time, time's up, so to speak, on women not having the healthcare that they need. And, to wrap up the story of my journey, I was at Johns Hopkins University planning to become an OBGYN, and I was just still struggling so much. And so I would do research on Friday nights and Saturday nights because, I was not going out on dates given my situation. And so I was researching in the library and found an article on Stein-Leventhal disease, and all the light bulbs went off of recognition that this is in fact the disorder that I'm struggling with. Was able to bring that to my gynecologist the very next morning, and she confirmed my diagnosis, which is a very empowering experience, right? Where you figure something out yourself and the doctor comes for you. And then she said, we just don't have any options for you. We can just medicate you along the way. You're going to struggle with infertility and heart disease and obesity and diabetes and potential cancer. And, we'll just give you as much medication as we can to help you, but there's no cure. And I just remember feeling like very clear message from the cells of my body saying there was a different path for me that I needed to take. So I graciously told her that. I said, no, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to try something else. She said, what are you going to try? I said, I don't know yet, but I will get to the bottom of this. And one of the things I always had was great faith in my ability to figure things out. And so that served me really well. And then I would say within 2 years of that conversation, I had restored my cycle, my ovulation, dropped 60 pounds, cleared my skin, recovered my mood, and got my life back, and have been on fire ever since to help any woman who's going through this, because it just should not be that decade after decade, generation after generation, women still experience their hormones as a plague upon their life, where they really are supposed to be this extraordinary advantage because nature literally imbued you with the best of everything, the best brain, the best immune system, the best reproductive system, the best metabolism, the best absolutely everything, because you are encoded to 3D print tiny human beings, whether or not you choose to do that, because you're the gender that can do it, you have to have all the best ofs in order to be able to do that. And we don't experience ourselves that way, and we should, because that's our biological wiring.
Say if one of our listeners or one of us found that our hormones are out of whack or felt some of these symptoms, what would be our first move?
I think the best thing to do is to evaluate your cycle. In 2015 or 16, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists decreed that your cycle as a whole is to be considered your fifth vital sign. And just to be clear, the other 4 vital signs they take when you go to the emergency room, like your temperature, your blood pressure, right? You want to take very seriously you want to start tracking your cycle, any symptoms you're having. For example, do you have a lot of symptoms during ovulation? Do you have a lot of PMS? What is the color, consistency, and texture of your bleed? How long is it? How regular is it? Do you produce visible cervical fluid? What is going on? You have to get in there, so to speak, and start observing your cycle in real time. It is every month valuable biofeedback about what is going on with your hormone ratios. In fact, back in 2013, I went on Dr. Oz and made TV history, believe it or not, being the first woman or person to ever talk about menstrual color as it relates to hormones and to simulate these menstrual fluids on national television. And it was groundbreaking because to have you be able to visualize these 4 or 5 different color combinations that your period can be is very empowering. For example, if you have heavy, dark, clotty bleeding every month and you're struggling with a little excess weight and you have some breakouts and you feel moody, you could be struggling with excess estrogen, right? If you have brownish prune juice colored like fluid that starts at the beginning of your bleed or at the end of your bleed, you could have a progesterone insufficiency. And these are things that change. It's not that you would have this, you don't necessarily have to have the same kind of bleed month over month. You often do until these hormones are resolved, but it can change not just very rapidly month to month, but definitely over the course of your entire reproductive lifespan. It's important to understand and evaluate. So that's the first thing. I built a very well-loved period tracking app because when people ask me after Woman Code came out, people started asking me to build an app. And I said, well, I just don't want to make an app that just says, hey, your period's coming. Most of us know when that's about to happen. A little too obvious.
It's almost like when I get the alert that my period starts in 2 days, it's almost like a downer, like I have to get this message.
Exactly. And it's not very empowering. And I even saw some that had been developed by men, no question, that had and like the image for ovulation, to represent ovulation, was like a tube of lipstick or a high heel, because that's when you were sexually more open to, I guess, men. I mean, it's not a little. There's a lot of still not good gender bias that exists. So I built an app called MyFLO, myflowtracker.com, and it helps you track not just your symptoms, but helps to teach you in micro doses as it's happening. Like, let's say you get a breakout day 14, right? You're ovulating. This is when your skin is supposed to be magically the most beautiful. Your face actually changes slightly in symmetry. You have more collagen production. I mean, this is supposed to be the good skin week, right? But you're having chin breakouts. You're going to click that as a symptom, and then it's going to tell you why that's happening to you. None of this should be mysterious. So that's the first thing, is start tracking and start getting the education that you need to really understand what's going on. What you're going to find is that you're having an imbalance of estrogen and progesterone. And then what you want to do is start taking steps to help your body break down estrogen, make more progesterone if needed, and start to balance your endocrine system and also take care of your infradian rhythm as a whole, which I know we're going to dive into. That's something from my new book, but it's so important to start doing that cleanup work. And the FLO protocol that's described in Woman Code, and that's part of the well-loved monthly FLO program, really helps take you through what do you do from start to finish. I don't want any woman to feel like they have to figure this out on their own like I did. I've laid out all the steps. All you have to do is log in and follow them.
Yeah, we're already following. We have the apps. We do all the tracking. I track all my friends because they won't track themselves. So
that's a good friend. You are a good friend.
They're my science experiment.
She had a little journal for me before I had one for myself. So
that is like what I would
track
call
my husband too.
Good ovary karma.
Every now and then, like I would tell her how I was feeling about something, like feeling really bloated today, or like experiencing this with my boyfriend. And she would like, her first question, what day of the month are you on? Like it was always, and then I realized she was tracking me.
I love that.
It gave us so many answers. It's given us so many answers. And I learned it from you. So Alisa, this is important work you're doing. Through your story, it's obvious you're in your calling, and you whatever way you want to look at it, the universe brought you, your own struggles and laid it out right in front of you, plain as day. I did want to, before we jump into, first of all, how to understand when something might be off, what are the symptoms and signals to look for there, and then how to go about healing ourselves. I wanted to kind of back us up for a moment just to get anyone listening on board, which by the way, we have about a 50-50 male-female audience for this show. And that's something super important. We talked about a little bit before you got on is getting men on board and getting our life partners on board with this whole journey, because they have women in their life no matter what. If you're a man, you have several different women in your life, whether it's your sister, mother, lover. And the first thing I want to cover there is, why is menstruation and the female reproductive cycle, even childbirth, all these things, why are they still taboo? They're like the last taboo topic, it feels like. What is the resistance we've got going on there?
I think it's getting so much better. Listen, about 5 years ago, I started seeing something that was historic, which was and it started with a few really beautiful, smart, genius, intelligent, and brave millennials who were posting pictures of their bleeding on Instagram. Like, oh, look, here's my bloody spot on my pants or my bed, or here's my period cup full of my menstrual fluid, or I'm going to run the London Marathon with no pad on because that's going to be a big problem, obviously. And that sparked a conversation in wellness media outlets like Well and Good and Mind Body Green, and even other larger publications that really started to ask that same question of, it's time to normalize menstruation. And it was for the first time in recorded human history. And my calling is science. One of my passions is history. And so really looking back at all of from the Renaissance to the feminist first wave movement, that nothing like this had happened before, where it was just so much penetration into the mass media because of the internet. And it's so exciting, and it has only expanded and improved and normalized the conversation more and more. Has it completed its work? Are we there yet with this being normal? No, and it goes back to what you had just said about how important it is to loop in men as allies. So I think that this is something in the medical community is when you're a resident, right? When you're learning how to become, the head surgeon of your area, your department, the rule of thumb is you learn one and you teach one, right? So you learn a procedure and then you teach a procedure, because if you do that, you're continuing the knowledge bank and expanding the circle. We need to do the same thing as women. First, we need to learn, right? We need to learn about how our biology works. We need to let go of this toxic mythology that we've all been infected by, that says that this is a curse, that your hormones are mysterious, unknowable, unpredictable, undefinable, on their impact on your body, that you are just this creature of the mysterium, right?
A witch.
This is
burner at the stake.
Yeah, utter BS and nonsense when you look at the biology. And that's why I'm so excited about my new book, In the Flow, because I lay this out so clearly for you. There should be zero questions left about how your body works after you read this book. And then once you are totally familiar and intimate with your function, then you teach, right? So that looks like, for example, my husband, since our first date, we have been talking about hormones and women and the gender bias that is very unconscious that we have in our society, the cultural narrative that is toxic. And so I'm educating him on a women's history, feminist theory, and hormones so that he can have some education about it, because he has not had any exposure. And I never let anything slide. Right. For example, here's a great example. My father the other day, who I love, who has contributed greatly to my confidence and self-esteem, and has been like a feminist without realizing it all his life because of his relationship with his mother, who was just an extraordinary woman. He said, we were having some conversation. He said, men are really simple. They need like food and they need whatever, right? And he was saying these like the things you always hear about what men need, 3 simple things, right? Sleep and food and some affection. Okay. And I said to my dad, because it just was coming right out of my body, I said, where is the equivalent conversation for women that says, oh, women are so simple, they just need these 3 things? And he said, well, because they're not. And I said, let's pause right here and let me tell you why that's not true and why that is a representation of some unaddressed gender bias that you're holding without even wanting to. And I gave him a little education about the 3 simple things women need in a relationship. From my point of view, we need to be witnessed in all that we're doing, right? I want my husband to notice, gosh, I'm so impressed with all the school research you're doing. Thank you for doing it. I just want him to notice and verbalize that.
Yeah, like credit, a little bit of credit.
A little bit of appreciation,
yeah.
Right? And, you know, in the world of masculine and feminine relationship dynamics, they would call that the divine masculine, witnessing the divine feminine in her dance of all her multifaceted talents, right? So we want the man to just notice and say, I see you, right? Yeah. Which a lot of men forget to do. They notice, they see, but they don't say it. And then the woman,
are you listening?
The woman feels unappreciated. Oh yes, by the way, men, I am literally now giving you several keys to the kingdom of your happiness if you're in a relationship.
Yeah, seriously.
Please take copious notes.
Copious.
So number 1 is watch what she's doing, register it in your brain and say, wow, I'm seeing this. Even if you don't have an opinion about it, just say, wow, look at what you're doing. You do so many things. I really appreciate and acknowledge that about you. And then we need help. Right? Offer your help on anything that we're doing. Like, oh, can I help with the dishes? Can I help take out just help, just volunteer your support with physical help. And then 3, physical affection in the way that we want to receive it. Very simple. Women in relationships want very simple things, equivalent, different, but in the equivalency of the simple things that men want. Why is that not the cultural norm? Why is that not part of our cultural narrative to even have that assumption? Well, it's because of all this gender bias, and it comes from this outcropping of the legacy of this toxic mythology we have around menstruation and reproduction and birth and postpartum. For example, this thing about postpartum really, really gets me fired up. There's this cultural conversation that says, oh, gee, my wife, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, this is more common. My wife is not the same person that she was before she gave birth and got pregnant. And I wish she was. When is that going to come back? And here's something that was just so important that came out research, and I do not remember the researcher's name, but you can Google her. She has a very important TED Talk. I wrote about her in the new book, so she's in the book. But she coined a brand new term. And in her research, doing brain scans on postpartum women, they discovered that the structural changes to the female brain, pregnancy and postpartum, are an order of magnitude way greater than the massive structural changes that happen in puberty. Wow. So first thing is, 1, you are definitely not the same person. And you'll never be the same again because those structural changes are permanent. Second, we have a culturally normalized in our cultural narrative, right, that we have to give a wide berth for teenagers as they go through this massive brain shift until they emerge and become the new self, the new young adult self. But we give 0 slack to new moms because we don't look at the science and we've ignored it. And so until we bring the science forward and actually have a working relationship with facts and not toxic mythology, we will never have a society that is egalitarian. We will have a society that perpetuates a gender imbalance that is not healthy for anyone.
Wow. Yeah. There's hormones themselves is just like one of those words people think, oh yeah, I know what those things are, but the depth of, that's all we are. We're these chemicals that make up our personalities and responses. And I think anyone, man or woman, is going to be their life will be greatly improved by getting any kind of extended knowledge or wisdom in this area. And like you said, absolutely. The hero's journey you've been on in your own life of testing it on yourself, applying it to yourself, and learning the depths of how those chemicals in your body work and how to, change them with your own tools and willpower, and then be able to teach that to the world, which you're doing so beautifully here. And thank you for bringing men along with us, because I think that's the
I
critical
love
piece
that.
of this.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up without sisters. I have two brothers. I have a father. I have great relationships with the men in my life. And that's why I actually built the partner sync feature in the app, because when I teach, often when there are men in the audience, you can see that they have been like hung for this, because all they want is to have the information that they have about themselves. Men have been taught from a young age about how their hormonal patterns work and how to optimize their lives around it. For example, every man knows he wakes up with the largest concentration of blood serum testosterone, right? So he's going to organize certain activities if he can to take advantage of that testosterone. Women have, their pattern is circadian, right? It's a rinse and repeat every 24 hours. So they know how to organize their day, their life, their time. Every time management program, every success guru, every power morning routine, everything like that you've heard, workout, time of day, when to eat, all of that is oriented around male biology. And the circadian rhythm. And men, without even being consciously aware of this, because of the cultural narrative that they've been fed about their bodies and their biology, they know to take advantage of these things. And they, again, I think it's subconscious, wish that there was a similar recipe for success with the women that they love, so that they could have an easier time interacting with them. Like, gee, I wish I knew it's because if we don't have an organized pattern to look at, everything looks like chaos, right? So if a man is saying, gee, I notice sometimes my wife is tired, sometimes my wife is moody, sometimes she's really interested in sex, sometimes she's not. Is it me? A lot of men have reported to me that they feel insecure in relationship to women because they don't understand these pattern changes. And they love when I give them it's a grid, it's a 4x4 grid. Here's the 4 hormonal shifts. Here's what you need to know about spending time together, sex and foreplay, and socializing, right? And domestic stuff. And here you go. Now you have here's a map to interacting with the female person in your life in a way that's going to optimize the interaction. Right?
It's so simple that it's like, how has this not been laid out before? And that's why I just love your work. And I know it's so groundbreaking, and it is changing. It's changing the world as we know it, as we speak, literally. I love that we can also offer you a platform here.
5 love languages got super trendy, and like the archetypes got super trendy. So hopefully everyone jumps on board sooner rather than later. So I do want to go back to what we're speaking about and to kind of cover the basics before we get into determining whether we have hormonal imbalances and how to heal those. First, let's cover the basics for women in their childbearing years, because that's largely what we're speaking to here, regarding what the phases you're talking about, the map you're talking about, what the hormonal cycle consists of, and maybe you can also break down your infradian rhythm as well.
So let me give a little backstory, and I'm going to just hold up a picture of my new book. So I want to give a little backstory on this new book. Okay. So I had written Woman Code, and it's been a bestseller ever since it was published in 2013. And I thought, great, I've built the platform, I've written a guide now, and now because of all the free bleeding millennials, there's more media coverage to talk about menstrual health. Perfect. Now we have an equation, more content, more access should equal more healthy women.
Yes.
But instead, what I've been tracking is that there's been a worsening of hormonal issues for women. And like I said, 47% of women are struggling with hormonal issues and in their reproductive years. It's a huge number when you compare it to the male cohort, which is something like under 10%.
Wow.
So why is that? I started asking myself, why am I not seeing an improvement if we have historically now moved into a place where women can access all this content online? There are no barriers to information. What is going on? And what I found was a little bit disturbing, but also really exciting. Okay. The first thing that I found was that women are being left out of medical, fitness, and nutrition research entirely. Okay. Which means that every time you read an article that says intermittent fasting confers life extending health benefits, that actually has not been researched on women in their reproductive years. And the research that I dug up, the little bit of research I dug up, which I put in this book, actually shows that it's the opposite. For women in their reproductive years, intermittent fasting does the exact opposite. Instead of improving insulin sensitivity, it worsens it.
No way.
Instead of improving your brain performance, it increases brain fog. There's a whole list. And by the way, to boot, it shrinks your ovaries, which is not what you want to be doing in your reproductive years. So everything that you read about wellness, about how to set up your day, about, you know, what the best workout is. We'll talk about high intensity interval training too in a minute. All of these things are being researched on men. So that's the first thing.